The legislature's assault on working families moved into the House and Senate chambers this week as the Tallahassee Army of Darkness finished up their committee meetings and moved to the full session. Bills that have been debated for weeks are taking on their final forms as the dystopian future they are planning for our state takes focus. School safety, education funding, and constitutional rights were again under siege, with only the activists sent from the Working Families Lobby Corps to stand in their way. This week saw the final committee meetings for the Senate, where legislators tried to force through some last-minute attacks. This started with the further preemption of local government by unfairly forcing legal fees onto municipalities enacting ordinances to help their communities.
We gon' see if we can't come up with a verdict up in here.
Attorneys' fees passed, making it much harder for cities and counties to challenge preemptions they feel are unfair in court. Senator Simmons led a desperate attempt to strip our constitutional rights by amending SB 7066, which would have added language unrelated to the bill that would eliminate the citizen initiative process. Bolstered by the presence of the Working Families Lobby Corps, supportive legislators stood up to this unnecessary attack, and the amendment was not heard. The attack was more intense in the House of Representatives chamber as HB 7111 moved through its second reading and final vote. Before session began, allies joined together to let the legislature know a yes vote on 7111 would mean the death of the Citizens Initiative. Many legislators agreed with those protesting this damaging legislation and stood up in defense of the voter's voice, passionately speaking against this unconstitutional overreach.
Our voters wanted restoration of felon rights, and we heard yesterday how that matter had been filed in the legislature for years and years, and yet we never passed it. This is the citizens' opportunity to make their voices heard. A lot of people are not getting the representation that they deserve, and that means that they have to do things like put constitutional amendments on the ballot to make sure that we are protecting our citizens, that we are providing health care for our citizens, that we are looking out for the safety of our citizens. They are having to look out for themselves because we aren't doing our job.
That is an obvious double standard. Do as I say, not as I do. Folks were talking about, this is not a problem. This is going to be so easy. These requirements are not a big deal. Everyone can do this. This is not a big deal. Okay. Well, if it's not a big deal, why are we not requiring candidates for the Florida legislature to have all of their volunteers who are collecting candidate qualifying petitions to register with the state or county? Well, because that would be really hard now, wouldn't it? That's the point. Don't try to silence the voice of the people. We need to lift them up. We need to listen to them. And we need to respect our democracy. Please vote no on this bill.
Unfortunately, their arguments against this attack were not enough to sway opponents of the democratic process who would rather stand idly by as our right to amend the Constitution through ballot initiatives took another step closer to devastation. The bill passed the House as we wait to see what happens in the Senate. School safety was up next on the Senate agenda as the legislature pushed the state closer to a dystopian future devoid of real solutions that would ensure safe classrooms for children and educational professionals.
We believe an efficient police force is only part of the solution. No, we need something more. It gives me great pleasure to introduce you to the future of law enforcement.
The cheap fix of arming teachers was put to the floor as the senators questioned and debated SB 7030. Some legislators stood up for common sense and spoke to the fact that putting guns in the hands of classroom teachers is not the solution to tragedies that are becoming more common across the country.
We should protect from the outside in. We don't need to bring guns into the classroom with the precious children that are sent to school every single day.
We know that there have been safety issues where people leave guns where they don't belong. Where is the research also that more guns make a school safer? There is none.
Mind you, these are the same teachers where just a year ago we were debating, let's not give them annual contracts, but we want to put guns in their hands.
If we're not listening to the teachers or the parents or the families, at the very least, please listen to these kids. They deserve to have their voices heard.
We're about to vote on a bill that, if passed, simply goes too far. It increases the likelihood that we will have unintentional deaths in schools.
Unfortunately, SB 7030 was passed on its final vote, the first step towards a dark future for public education. Not happy with only gutting school safety, the legislature also went after the future of public school funding. The tax scheme to divert public money to private school vouchers was fiercely debated as defenders of our education system implored their fellow legislators to follow the previous Supreme Court ruling that prohibits general funds going to private schools.
How are the family empowerment scholarships any different from the Opportunity Scholarship vouchers, which were found unconstitutional in Bush v. Holmes? I submit that they are not any different. We already move $1 billion a year through scholarship programs. These are additional funds that our public schools are so desperately in need of. And so, for that reason, I cannot be supporting this bill today.
This Family Empowerment Scholarship is estimated to drain another $136 million from public education. What is our obligation for education? A well-funded public education system. That's not what this bill does. It does the exact opposite.
Unfortunately, the Senate voted for the tax scheme and passed SB 7070, while the House finalizes their version of this bill, which will devastate public education. The attack on education funding did not stop there as the House heard HB 7123. This bill is another attack on the fundamental right of local government control. Many counties across the state have passed local referendums to fund their public schools, but this bill would force them to share these new funds with charter schools. Some legislators agreed with the counties, many of which specified in their referendums that the money be allocated only for public schools.
Charter schools are private nonprofit corporations operating pursuant to a contract with the sponsor district. You're saying their employees are part of the same bargaining units that were part of the agreements in Miami-Dade, for example, that were negotiated?
Representative Avila.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative, what I was saying is that a charter school teacher as well as a public school teacher, they're both employees of the school district.
Were you aware that there were charter schools and or lobbyists for charter schools that advocated against this provision?
Representative Avila.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, I was not.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. And this is my last question along that same line as far as looking at how the funds are spent. Would the charter schools be subject to the oversight of the Millage Oversight Committee?
Representative Avila.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative, to your question, probably not.
The bill passed as part of a massive tax overhaul and will be inserted into Senate legislation, so be alert for the next round of the attack on public education. Both the Senate and the House heard their versions of the Show Me Your Papers immigration bill, which looks to make working Floridians responsible for the enforcement of bureaucratic orders the courts have ruled unconstitutional. This bill is a way to spread fear by forcing working Floridians not trained as immigration enforcement officers to report and, when possible, detain suspected immigrants. Many legislators listened to the community members worried about those who will now be responsible for enforcing the law, as well as the families that will be torn apart by this increased enforcement.
I just wonder, when did we become so anti-immigrant? How many sanctuary cities or counties does the bill say we have here in Florida? Zero. Not one. But this bill has made it through every committee, and now we're getting ready to vote it into law. It shows our priorities. But we can't hear a livable wage. Nobody wants to talk about a livable wage. Why? Why do we want to do that? When we could talk about targeting undocumented people who are just trying to make a living.
The ACLU has issued a Florida travel alert. Among the issues raised are risks of being racially profiled and detained without probable cause. We can't afford to pass this bill here in Florida. There's absolutely no reason why we need this bill, and I urge all of you to vote against it.
With legislative session winding down, the attacks are coming faster and stronger than ever. Thankfully, the activists of the Working Families Lobby Corps were there to march into battle and stand up for the future of Florida. Listen as they describe their week fighting for working families at the Capitol.
All my brothers and sisters behind me and I are up here working for you to get the legislature to pass favorable legislation for working class families.
This is my first time visiting. It was a great experience. I just left out of the House meeting that was very passionate, very concerning about immigration. I love the experience, and I look forward to doing it again.
It's much better to be proactive than reactive, and let's not wait for bad things to happen. Let's stop them before they do.
We've been handing out letters to our senators and House representatives, and we're making a difference, and we're speaking from our hearts and telling them that our vote matters.
This is a good idea for everybody to come up here and just get to know how the system works.
It's great to meet some new brothers and sisters and see how the gears turn up here in government, in our state government.
It was great being back, talking to our representatives, and everybody needs to come and do it.
You have a role here in Tallahassee. You have a voice, and we need your voice.
It's one thing to put a legislator's name on a ballot and fill out a circle. It's another to see them in progress doing the things we want them to do, or in some cases the things we don't want them to do.
When the election was over, your job didn't end. Pick up your phone, call your senator, call your representative, and tell them what you expect them to do for you.
You are we the people, and our democracy only works if you are involved.
The battle has been long and difficult, but it has been worth it, fighting for our future. The politicians and powerful big money industry leaders behind them have been relentless in their attacks on working families, but the activists sent to join the Working Families Lobby Corps have fought back valiantly.
Hasta la vista, baby.
We thank everyone for the help so far, but the battle to avoid a dark, dystopian future for Floridians is not over. Stay tuned for any updates and calls to action as the legislature volleys their final attack on our future. Solidarity.